Hello, project managers and prospective project managers. Thank you for joining us for the intermediate level of Microsoft Project. My name is David Lieberman, and I'll be showing you through Microsoft Project and the ins and outs of working a project while it's running, filtering, reporting, modifying the project, setting up resource pools, and building master projects where you have more than one project that affects each other. By the way, if you've sort of taught yourself Microsoft Project, it is one of those programs that you can teach yourself, but there are a lot of little things that'll come along and maybe bite you in the long run. So you might want to take a deep breath and go back and watch the beginning parts. You'll probably know a lot of it, but you'll probably also pull a couple of key points that'll help you along in your Microsoft Project life. Otherwise, let's get started. In front of us, I have a project open right now called Tracking Project Before. You can get that project out of your resources and follow along if you like. These courses are made to be followed along with. You learn a lot more when you do it that way. Are you excited? All right, let's go. Now, let's say that you've planned a lovely project like we have here. Notice that we set durations and start days and links. We've assigned resources to work and leveled those resources if there were any overallocations. We also made sure that we set constraints, tasks that need to start on a specific day or that need to be finished by a specific day. There are a couple of things that you'll need to do before you begin official work, and probably the most important thing is deciding what day you'll start on. But you also notice that we've got a good amount of lag time in here. That also provides us a lot of slack. So what we really want to know is, hey, what's the latest we can start this project without affecting the finish date? And then usually we'll give ourselves a little bit of wiggle room within there. Good for us, there's a column that actually tells us what's the latest we can start. That column is appropriately called the Late Start column. To add a column, it's pretty easy. You give a right click on the top of any column, and you tell it to insert a column. Here you'll see the myriad of different types of columns that Microsoft Project can add. There's a whole bunch of them. And we can either scroll through or just start typing the one that you're looking for. I'm looking for the latest I can start, what's officially called the late start. So I'll start typing the word late and look what I get. Late start, Oh, there it pops in right next to where I was. And looking at these, it looks like probably the latest we can start is right around March 29th. You guys see that one? So we all know that if we start a project the latest we can possibly start it, something's going to go wrong. So instead of starting on March 29th, let's back up the start date a couple of days, or maybe even a couple of weeks. Now it's important to see that we're padding the project by starting it earlier than we need to, instead of by making up padded times for our individual tasks. That way later, when we analyze how long things really took, we'll get a good idea of how long things actually really take and at how good our resources are at estimating durations. Starting the project is pretty easy. We'll head up to the Project tab, where you go to set all of the things that are project-wide, and one of the main pieces of project information is the start day. So I'll give that a click, and I'll say, yeah, let's go ahead and give ourselves a good amount of wiggle room. Let's start maybe March 14th. When I click March 14th, you'll notice that the project will change the way that it looks over on the graphical side in the Gantt chart. And now I've got official starts and finish days for all of my tasks. Okay, so when setting a start date for the project, you add a late start column, look at the latest you can start that, and then back it up a little bit. And then you set the start day up on project to project information. Go ahead and pause the video and try that now. Now that you've got a plan, you can start working that plan. The thing is, for sure, there's going to be variance. Project managers that are very adverse to change have a very unhappy life. So you're going to have to get kind of zen with change and variance, and things will be added to the scope and all kinds of good stuff like that. Just because it does happen doesn't mean we don't think about it. In fact, it's very important to track variance. That way we can see what we thought was going to happen and what actually happened, as far as time and cost. and as far as features that we decided to add into the project. If you're going to compare the project to the way that it is at some future date to the way that it is now, it's pretty important to save a baseline snapshot so that we can compare the two. So that's what we'll do. Again, we'll head up to the Project tab, and look, right up there you've got Set Baseline. If I open that up, Set Baseline is a choice, right? Now right here you'll see Set Baseline, and there are 11 different baselines that you can set. Really, the idea is sooner or later the project will change a certain amount that it's kind of unfair to compare it to the original baseline. And so instead, you can save a new baseline and say, well, first it was like this, and then it was like this, and here's the variance that we had from that. Make sense? Later on, we'll also save the baseline for some other types of more custom analysis. Okay, so all I'm going to do is click Baseline and click OK. Now, it doesn't really seem like it did much, but it did. Behind the scenes, it set baseline values for all of the values that we have right now. In general, you set a start day, then you save a baseline, and now you're ready to really start your project. So give that a shot. In your project, go up to the Project tab, click on Set Baseline, and set a baseline. Now that you've got your project set, and hopefully approved by everybody who needs to approve your projects, we're ready to start working on it. So let's look a little bit at setting up a project to be able to track efficiently while it runs. Now, this table right here that we've been working with so far is officially called the entry table because we've been entering a whole bunch of tasks into it, right? There's a whole nother table that's made specifically for tracking. We could edit this one and add all the columns that tracking Gantt has in it, or we can just switch to the tracking Gantt. If you look in the upper left-hand corner, you'll see that right now we're on the Gantt chart. If you pull down on that, you'll see the most common views that people switch back and forth between. There's the resource sheet that we saw earlier. Well, if you look down near the bottom of this list, you'll find the tracking Gantt. If I click the tracking Gantt, I might have to go up to View to Entire Project to see my project. You'll see that there are some things here that weren't here before. The main difference is that the tracking Gantt comes built in with a late start, and you've got a % complete number next to the tasks. Right now they're all 0%, but that'll change pretty soon. You might also notice on the Gantt chart that you've got kind of a double bar here. Well, the bar on the bottom is the baseline. Remember when we set the baseline a minute or so ago? The bar on top is the current duration. So for example, if somebody came to us and said, oh, there's no way we can create the invites in 3 weeks, we're probably going to need 3.5 weeks. So I could change that to 3.5 weeks, and you can see the variance in a visual way. Make sense? I'm going to put it back, but you get the idea. Now, also found within this view are different colored options. Right down here we have red. If I were to make a new project very quickly, I have task 1, task 2, and task 3. Now if I link task 1 to task 3, and then I go to the tracking Gantt, you'll see that some of these come in red. The ones that are red basically can't get pushed back unless you want the finish date of the project to get pushed back. So those tasks that will affect the finish date of the project if they're late are referred to as critical tasks, probably because they're critical to the finish date of the project. And the path that makes up those tasks is referred to as the critical path. This is terminology that you'll hear project managers using all the time. They're always referring to the critical path and what's on it, mostly because those are the tasks you need to pay the most attention to, because again, if they get pushed back, the finish date of the project gets pushed back as well. Now, there'll be other ways for us to pay attention to the critical tasks and critical path as we go, but it's kind of nice to be able to see those in the tracking Gantt. Go ahead and in the tracking project, go up to the upper left-hand corner and change yourself to the tracking Gantt. In the next lesson, we'll learn how to modify the tracking Gantt so that it makes it a little bit easier to track with. Now that we've got our tracking Gantt, let's modify it a little bit so it works better for us while we're tracking projects while they actually run. So for example, right here I've got a nice late start column. And again, what late start says is these are the dates that are the latest you can start a task if you don't want the project finish date to be pushed back. Well, that's nice and everything, but usually when you have resources come ask you, hey, I need some wiggle room, usually what they're most concerned with is the finish date, not the start date. What's the latest I can turn something in? So late start is useful, and late finish is also useful. So I'm going to add a late finish column. Remember, the way you do it is you just right-click on the column head, and you hit Insert Column. I'll find late finish, give it a click, and ooh, that's a useful date. Press pause, and add a late finish to your project. Okay, while you're actually tracking the project, you're mostly going to be concerned with, hey, did it actually start? And if so, when did it actually finish? This will give you accurate dates, but will also give you accurate durations. And while you're working on the project, how finished are you on any given task? Let's do that one first. I'm going to add a handy percent complete column. It's pretty easy. You give any column a right click, choose Insert Column. Ooh, look, it's the first one. Percent complete. Now, normally when you're saying how complete a task is, you do it with tasks, not with phases. So if I were to talk to my resource and say, how finished is the guest list? Generally, the resource will give you some sort of estimation. Now, some places do work out actual physical scales, called a physical percent complete scale, where you can look at the task and physically measure how finished it is. If that's where you work, then great. Otherwise, most of the time you end up with kind of a guess. Maybe I'll put in 50%. You'll notice that my graphic changed to represent graphically and numerically how finished I am with this task. And maybe it's tomorrow or the next day and someone's finished, so I'll put 100% in there. Ooh, look at that satisfying checkmark I get. Also, you'll notice there's a graphic inside of the phase name, showing you how complete you are with the actual phase. Pretty neat, right? Let's try that. Go ahead and press pause, add a percent complete column, and let's make the guest list 100% complete. Now, while you're tracking a project, yes, you're interested in how finished each task is, but as a project manager, you'll also definitely want to know when tasks are started and when they're finished. When someone actually starts a task, that's referred to as the actual start. And so actual finish is referred to as actual finish. Those are generally two columns that you'll add here in the tracking Gantt. So let's go ahead and do that. I'll right-click, insert a column. I just type actual. Oh, and there's actual start. Give it a click. Open it up so I can see the dates. And I'll add an actual finish as well. There we go. Now note that Make Guest List already has actual start and actual finish dates in there. Because we said that the task is 100% complete and didn't change the actual start or actual finish, it assumed that we actually started when we thought we were going to and actually finished when we thought we were going to as well. Now, creating the invites is scheduled right now to start on 3:15. You see that there? So let's say, though, that it didn't start on 3:15, that we actually started on 3:16 because that's how life works. There we go. And now I can come in and give it an actual finish. Now, if you change the actual finish and it doesn't equal the original duration, it'll give you an actual duration as well. If I were to put 100% complete, it would reference the original estimated duration to create an actual finish. So let's say that creating the invites only took 2 weeks, and we finished it on March 30 because our design team rocks. Now you'll notice we're showing quite a bit of variance here from our baseline. And that's okay. It'll also maybe let us know that next time marketing tells us something will take a certain amount of time, that marketing likes to pad their estimates so that they're not late. Using a combination of percent complete, actual start, and actual finish, project managers can use Microsoft Project to track a project while it runs, make sure that you're on time, and deal with problems if they arise. Go ahead and add an actual start and actual finish column to yours if you haven't already, and play around with it. Make sure that it makes sense to you. When you're ready, move along into the next module. So, while you're first building projects, it's kind of nice to see this Gantt chart view over on the side. In real life, it just gets way too complicated to be able to look at and get meaningful data out of. Which is okay because most of the time you end up opening up the tracking Gantt all the way anyway. Make sense? Hit pause really quick and open yours up. We're going to play around with some of the columns that you see revealed now. Okay, so let's say that while you're running a project, you've got someone proofreading the invites for you. If I go up to Resource and click the Assign Resources panel, I can see who is assigned to work on proofreading the invites. Right now I've got the manager and the worker. And right now, I'm saying that it better take 3 days. And right now, I'm saying it takes about 3 days to actually proofread. So what happens if the manager or the worker or both can't spend as much time as they thought they were going to be able to spend on the task? Maybe they can only spend half of the time. Well, simple math would tell us if we spend half of the time working on something, it'll probably take us twice as long to do. And sometimes that is true. But sometimes it's not true as well. So here's the lesson we're getting to. If you change a resource assignment after you've originally assigned them, Microsoft Project will sometimes change the duration on the task. Now, sometimes this is a great thing for you, and sometimes it's not. So until you become very familiar with it to where you can predict what Microsoft Project will do, here's the trick. If you change a resource assignment, go check the duration. So for example, let's say I go down to Manager, and I give that a 50%, and I change the worker to 50% as well. We'll note that proofreading invites is changed to 6 days, and now someone's overallocated as well. If it turns out that the manager and the worker can actually still get it done in 3 days, that's okay. We'll just go change 6 days right back to 3 days. So it lets things be both real world and mathematically calculated. If you want to remember something, it is important that if you change a resource assignment after you've already originally assigned it, you have to go check the duration to make sure that it's still what you want it to be. Give that a shot on your own. Go up to the Resource tab and open up the Assign Resources panel. And then change the assigned percentage of a resource on a task and watch what happens to the duration. If you don't like what happens, you can go ahead and manually adjust the duration to be however you want. This is an important thing to know about Microsoft Project, so take a little bit of time to practice with it until you feel at home. For our next lesson, I've created a very simple project. The other one that we're playing with is getting a little complicated looking. Let's pretend that we've got this very simple project, and now we're tracking it while it's running. I'm going to switch myself over into the tracking Gantt, and I'll add a % complete column. Now let's say this first task is 100% complete, and then this second task is 50% complete. You'll see that it makes up part of the critical path, and that the graphic shows us graphically it's 50% complete as well. Now there's a really nice trick that you'll probably use in real life. It was originally intended for when your boss comes by and you're in the middle of a project and says, "Ooh, let's put this project on the back burner right now and come back to it later." So basically, we'll stop the project and then reschedule it at some other date. By the way, best practice is, if you don't have a restart date or can't get one, the project should be treated like it's over. So you can use the thing that we're about to learn to pause a project in the middle, and more likely, you can also use it to pause a task in the middle. So for example, here with task number 2, we're 50% done, right? Let's say we had to stop task number 2 for a couple of days, and then we'd come back to it. It's pretty easy to do. What you're going to do is click on task number 2, and then head up to the Project tab. Now frankly, I kept forgetting where this was. It's on the Project tab because it was originally made to pause the whole project. Don't worry though, Google knows where it is as well. After I'm on the Project tab, I'll swing over to the Update Project button. I'll give that one a click. And yes, we can update work is complete through a certain day, or look, we can reschedule uncompleted work to start on a certain day, either for the entire project or for selected tasks, which is what I'm going to do right now. So I'll click Selected Tasks and reschedule the work to start after a certain day. Let's have it start after Monday the 22nd. Sounds pretty good to me. So you'll see what happens over here on the graphical side is, although it's still treated like one task, the place that we were at breaks the task and then restarts it again later. Useful, right? Okay, let's try it on yours. Create a task and then mark it as maybe 50% complete or something like that. Go to the Project tab and click Update Project. Then basically all you'll do is carefully look around. You'll see you want to update the selected tasks for a certain date. Go ahead and give that a shot, and while you're at it, consider yourself advanced. Here I am on the tracking project. I've got my divider moved out of the way so you can see all these columns. And you might remember that we added a % complete column and an actual finish column and an actual start. We kind of went crazy on this guy. You know what's not fun is having to add these same columns every single time that we make a project. So instead of that, we'll go to the organizer and export this table so that it's automatically available in the Microsoft Global template. The organizer is found under the File tab. Right away you're on Info, and oh looky, Organizer. So I'll give it a click. And you notice you've got all these different tabs up on the top. We've been changing the tracking Gantt. So if you click the tracking Gantt and click Copy, it'll copy over into the Global Microsoft Project template. So I'll go ahead and copy that. It says, "Hey, are you sure?" And I'll say, "Yeah, go ahead." Notice that you also have table views. We changed the entry table, so we can push that over. And later, there are a number of different things that we can change that we can also export to the Microsoft Global template. And if you had other projects open, you could choose those to export to as well. The organizer is a really powerful and important part of Microsoft Project if you're going to be modifying Project. And if you're taking this part of this course, you probably will be modifying Microsoft Project. So let's do this. In your project, go ahead and go up to the File tab. You're already on Info. Click Organizer. Go find the things that you've changed by clicking through the tabs on the top, and copy those things over into Microsoft Global Template. If you'd rather not change your global template right now, that's okay. You can just pretend you're going to copy something over. When you're ready, let's move on. You can imagine that there are times that you really only want to see the critical tasks so you can focus on them, or maybe see tasks that fall in between a particular date range, or tasks that are running late, or any other myriad of parameters that you might run into in your day-to-day life. Well, if you can picture that happening, then you'll be pretty happy about what we're going to do next, which basically filters data to only show those sorts of things. Now, before we do it, a little word of warning, because one time I filtered and didn't really remember that I did. There aren't that many visual indicators that you actually filtered, and I thought the project was broken or missing tasks. So either way, when you filter, you'll have to remember that you did, and you might need to go shut the filter off. The filters are found under View because you're changing your view, which makes sense, right? And right in the middle here, you've got Filters, or Highlights, which filter by highlighting, or Grouping, which filters by grouping. So I could open up No Filter and say, hey, only show me the critical tasks. These tasks are the ones that if they get pushed back, the entire project is getting pushed back. You'll notice you can filter for active tasks and completed. You'll take some time to look around in them. But when you're finished, you'll probably want to clear the filter or choose No Filter. Now everything's back. Now if you're grouping, maybe I'll group for critical, and it'll show me these are not critical and these are. Sometimes it's helpful to see more than one type. If I shut that off, you can highlight as well. Here's the critical tasks highlighted. There's not really too much that we can get into this, but sooner or later it's going to be very useful. One of the things that I find I often filter for is a date range. If you're working on a long project, you don't necessarily need to see everything in front of your face all the time. So I can filter for tasks that start or finish after a certain date. Okay, let's do this. Go ahead and go up to the View tab, and in the middle experiment with some different filters. Try the grouping filters or maybe even the highlighting filters. When you're ready, you can file that in your brain for later, and then move on to the next part. Isn't Microsoft Project fun? There are a number of reports in Microsoft Project that help you, the project manager, run the project while it's running, and help you, the project manager, look good, because you're giving all kinds of really cool looking reports to your boss. Funny enough, the reports are found on the Report tab, which makes sense, and you'll notice that you have reports about overall dashboards or resource reports, costs, or reports about in-progress tasks. So for example, if I go to the in-progress tasks, I can get a report just on the critical tasks. It's pretty nice looking, isn't it? And it lists out all the information that you need to know about the critical tasks. You can print a report from here by just going up to Print to Report, or you can return to the Gantt chart by clicking the Gantt chart button. Now, most of these reports are pretty self-explanatory, although you may want to take a little bit of extra time to look at visual reports. What visual reports really do is create a report in another piece of software. Usually that's Excel, but sometimes it's Visio if you have Visio installed in your computer. Now what's really going on here is information behind the scenes from Microsoft Project is being exported. If I choose Resource Work Summary Project, when I click View, data will be exported into Excel and a handy pivot table will be built in Excel. If you're familiar with pivot tables and how they work, you can actually play around with the report and change the way that it displays, what kind of data it shows, and its general usefulness. Here you'll see the pivot chart. That worker is putting in a lot of work. And on this tab down at the bottom, you'll see the actual pivot table that's being built. If you're not familiar with pivot tables, well, now you have the opportunity to go to our Excel class and learn all about them. They're really pretty useful. Actually, check that. They're really very useful. Either way, project comes built with a lot of nice looking reports or visual reports that open in another piece of software. Different reports are of different value to different people, so you'll kind of have to explore them on your own. Let's take some time to do that now. Press pause, go look through any reports. If you find ones that you think will be handy for you later, feel free to write them down or print them and show them to your boss. Take some time to explore the reports. They get pretty deep, and you'll really want to see the ones that may or may not be useful to you. Often a project manager will manage more than one project at the same time, and often the projects that he's managing will share resources. So it's nice that you can add resources to a project, but if you have to add those same resources to another project, it's quite possible that those resources will be over-allocated when you consider that they could be doing work on totally different projects at the same time. That's why most project managers utilize a resource pool. The way a resource pool works is you basically start a project, but you only add resources to it. You don't add tasks or anything else like that. For example, here's a resource pool that we have in the resources section of this training that you can download to follow along with. Note that if I go to the Gantt chart, there's nothing there, but when I go to View to Resource Sheet, we've got some resources. Now on this pretend project that we're working on, we've got some designers here. They're doing some designing. And we've got some developers who are developing the back end of the website that we're theoretically designing. Now in real life, these two projects do go together, and they share some of the same resources, but they're not really the same exact project, and so it behooves us to treat them separately. If I go to View to Resource Sheet, I'll see I don't have anything in here. Unless, of course, I go up to Resource and tell it, ooh, yeah, let's use a resource pool. If I share resources, I can share resources from any other file that's open right now. Later, it doesn't have to be open when you open the file. Project will do its thing automatically. Yeah, let's share those from the resource pool. And when I click OK, notice this resource sheet is populated. Now, it's not a copy of the resource pool, it is the same resource sheet. So if I add a worker here, they'll be added to the other resource sheet as well. Now, I can go over to Design, go to View to Resource Sheet. I see there's nothing there. So I can go to Resource Pool, and again, share the same pool. Now the neat thing is, now that I've got resources, I can go to View to Gantt and start assigning them. So I'll assign resources. Maybe the manager will be in the initial meeting, and they'll be involved in the design brief. So will the designer. And we'll just give the designer the rest of this here. Notice that the designer is already over-allocated. And when we switch over to the development project, I'll go to View to Gantt chart. And right away, I'm going to assign the manager to reviewing the client notes. And the manager is already over-allocated because the manager is assigned in a different project as well. Now I'll give the developers all the rest of this here, as to not go too crazy with it. And I could level right now, and it would level across projects, which is what you probably would do if these projects weren't interrelated. But they are, and so in a minute, what we're going to do is start putting these two projects together so that they can affect each other. First, why don't you go ahead and download the resource pool and the development project and the design project, and in each, go to the resource tab and share from the resource pool. Then you can assign resources if you like. Useful, isn't it? Now, in our last module, we saw that projects can share a resource pool. But in reality, often different projects affect each other. So normally you'd have to make one great big long project out of them that might end up being thousands of lines long, and that's no fun. So instead what we'll do is we'll make a master project. So the projects still exist on their own, but they also exist in the master project. And if one changes, the other changes as well. It's pretty easy to do. You go up to the File tab and you start a new project. To insert a project into another project, you go to the Project tab and tell it to insert a sub-project. So maybe I'll insert the design project, and I'll go ahead and insert the development project. Now take note that it is important that if you're inserting projects next to each other, that the projects are collapsed like they are now. If you open them up, you'll end up inserting a project as a sub-project to another project. So basically, if I inserted a project right now, they would all come in as a sub-project to research, which you might want to do, but you don't want to do by accident. So when you collapse them, they'll all insert as individual projects. Now that you've inserted projects, you can link between the actual separate projects. So let's say after the client meeting, now I can review client notes. And after I do some research, then I can create a design brief. And after I do the tech brief, now I can do preliminary development. So we're really linking back and forth between projects. And if you go look at those projects that are live, you'll see kind of the ghostly gray other tasks that belong to another project. This is a very powerful application that you can use in Microsoft Project that allows you to organize your projects separately or with whole separate project managers and then still have them affect each other. When you put this tool together with sharing resources, now you're starting to build an enterprise-level tool that you can use enterprise-wide. Okay, so remember, the way to build a master project is basically to build a blank project, click in the task view, and click on Project to Sub-Project. It's just that easy. Go ahead and try it now. We've seen that there are a lot of columns that you can add that include information that project already had. But sometimes you want to add a column that doesn't exist in project. Well, good thing you can add a column that allows you to put whatever you want into it. That kind of column is called a text column. So let's say that you wanted to put in the supervisor's name for each task. I can right-click on a column and click on Insert Column. And when I scroll down to Text, you'll see that there are about 30 columns that you can use randomly to include whatever you want. It doesn't really matter which one you choose, because later it'll remind you which one you did choose. Maybe I'll choose Text 14. Text 14 is not the world's most helpful name. After you choose a text column, you can double-click it and rename it. Be careful you don't rename it something that already exists, though. Now I have a supervisor column. How nice for me. Maybe David will supervise this one. And we'll have Jeff creating the invites. And good old Dave will be supervising proofreading the invites. And David Lieberman will be supervising the mailing of the invites. Pretty nice, right? Okay, well, go ahead and add your own text column. It doesn't really matter what you add it for, just that you understand that you can add your own columns that you can fill in with whatever you want later on. In the last module, if you missed it, we added a column that could contain whatever we wanted it to contain. So you notice here we've got a supervisor, and you've got David and Jeff and Dave and David Lieberman. Problem that we're running against here is that David and Dave and David Lieberman are the same person. And David is pretty aware of that, but Microsoft Project is not. So if I were to filter for David, it would only show me David. Instead, if you're doing something like this, it makes more sense to have a pull-down menu with a list. So that's what we're going to do right now. We're going to change the supervisor column to a column that users will populate by choosing from a list. It's pretty easy to do. After you create a column like we have here, you give it a right click and you go to Custom Fields. They should probably call it Customize Fields because that's what you're doing here. Now when you get here, there's a lot of stuff. But what you notice right now is that there are no custom attributes on this column. And really what we want to have happen is we want someone to have to look up the supervisor name from a list, right? That's why right here we'll click Lookup. Basically all you'll do is type the values in the list. So maybe I'll type David. And underneath that I'll type Jeff. Sandy is also a supervisor here. Now when I click all the way through, it's going to say, hey, you have to be careful because what you just did is going to replace some things in the list. So I'll close it, and it says, are you sure? And I'll say, yes, I'm sure. And then I'll click OK, and it'll say, all right, there you go. Now for the things that it could figure out, there's David, that's Jeff, it's great. But you notice everything else has been removed. So now I can click on Proofread Invites, and add David correctly. And maybe Sandy will supervise mailing the invites. Okay, so again, the way it works if you want to do a pull-down list is you create a regular text field first. Then you right-click it, go to Custom Fields, and choose Lookup. Try it yourself. This is a really useful tool. Now, the last thing we're going to learn is kind of a doozy, but it's super useful. So you might consider taking notes as we go, or just watching through the first time and then watching it again and taking notes. But here's the deal. Notice that I have a little project going on here, and I've got 6 different tasks. David and Sandy are working on these tasks, and David's become overallocated. Now, if I were to level right now, you'd pretty much be able to see what moves, but the problem pops up is that when you have 400 or 500 tasks or more, it's pretty hard sometimes to tell what leveling moved. And if you don't have a way to check it, then you can't really trust it, and then you've got trouble. So here's what we're going to do. You may remember that we saved a baseline earlier. Well, what we'll do this time is save a particular baseline before we level, then we'll level, and we'll save another baseline after. So those 2 baselines, if something moved, will show different dates. Then we'll make a custom column and subtract the dates from each other. If the dates are the same, it'll show 0 delay. If the dates are different, you'll get a number showing you how much that particular task moved. Okay, here's the way that it works. So I'm about to level, so before I do, I'll go up to Project to set baseline. Now set a baseline. The normal baseline is usually used for just starting the project, so instead I'll set baseline 1. And I'll click OK. Then I'll level by going up to Resource, to Level All, and I'll see that some tasks moved. Now really, I only have 6 tasks and it's still kind of a little tough for me to see what moved. Alright, so now I'm going to go back up to the Project tab and set a different baseline. This time I'll set baseline 2. So baseline 1 reflected what we had before we leveled, and baseline 2 will save what we had after we leveled. Now I'll build a column to show the difference. After you have the column, every time that you level, you'll save baseline 1, and then every time after you level, you'll save baseline 2. You'll basically use baseline 1 and baseline 2 over and over again. So let's do this. Build yourself a little project, assign some resources, make sure that the project task modes are automatically scheduled, and make sure you have some overallocations. Then, before you level, go to the Project tab and set baseline 1. Level on the Resource tab, and save baseline 2. Go ahead and do that now. Okay, now that you've done that, we're going to add a column that'll show the leveling delay. So I'll right-click and I'll insert a column. I'm going to insert a text column, and then I'll modify it. I'll do whichever one I feel like, because that's how I am. I'll call this one Level Date Change. Now you might notice there's already a column called Level Delay, which sounds great, but it'll only show you the first task that moved, and you need to see every task that moved. Now I've got a column, so I'm going to right-click it and go to Custom Fields. Instead of looking up from a list, this time we're going to calculate the data based on a formula. Basically, what we'll do is subtract the start of baseline level 1 with the start of baseline level 2. So I'll go down to Field, to Date, to Baseline Start. And there's baseline 1 start. From that, I'll subtract baseline 2 start. Field, to Date, to Baseline Start, to Baseline 2 start. I'll click OK. And you'll notice that all the tasks that moved will have a negative number. If you prefer to have a positive number, simply subtract baseline 1 start from baseline 2 start. I'm fine with negative numbers. Now that you've got this column, you can hide it. You don't necessarily need it in front of you all the time. And anytime you need it, you can come at it again. It's just hidden, it's not really gone. Oh, there it is, level date change. Nice, right? Okay, so again, what we're doing here is saving a baseline before we level, and then another baseline after. Then we added a custom column that calculated the column contents by subtracting one baseline start from the other baseline start. You see what I mean about you might want to back up and take some notes? Or the first time that you do it, feel free to watch through this video again. Neat, isn't it? As you can probably tell, Microsoft Project is a pretty advanced tool for planning out projects that would have been very difficult to plan on your own. And as you can also probably tell, if you don't start practicing right away, your new knowledge is going to fade away pretty quickly. So set aside some time for the next couple days, probably 3 days or so, and maybe for half an hour, to build a small project on your own. Have fun with it and feel free to experiment.